Hello and a warm welcome to the EDRM Global Webinar channel. My name is Mary Mack. I'm the EDRM CEO and Chief Legal Technologist. Today's webinar is a collaboration with our trusted partner, Purpose Legal. It's called Spring into Action, Real-World AI in eDiscovery Document Review. Our faculty experts are Robert Singleton, Ashley Bilbrey, and Jeff Johnson. We welcome your questions and feedback in the console. Questions will be answered both during and at the end of the webinar. And this webinar will be available for replay at your convenience for the next quarter, as are all of our EDRM webinars. Kaylee Wallstead, EDRM's Chief Strategy Officer, is here with us. Can you please share what resources are available today, Kaylee?
I'd love to, as long as you share that you can hear me.
I definitely can.
That's a bonus. Well, I have been so looking forward to this spring presentation with our trusted partner, Purpose. You are in for a great discussion today. We're also loving On24 with so many more ways for you, our audience, to engage. If you check out your console to the right, you'll see the question mark icon. And if you click on that, this is where you can type in your questions for today's faculty, and we highly encourage you to do so. Slides, as Mary said, will be made available after the webinar has concluded. And if you click on the paperclip icon, that's for related content. You'll see today's resources carefully curated just for you. There's an On24 engagement descriptor for you to download and help you better engage with the platform. There's also a link to learn more about EDRM's trusted partner, Purpose Legal, and a link to schedule a meeting with the experts at Purpose to learn more about their excellent suite of services. And then up next on EDRM's webinar channel, May 6th next week, generative AI for streamlining early case assessment and uncovering insights from eDiscovery. Speaker bios can be clicked and popped up to learn more about today's faculty. And then just like Zoom, you'll see the smiley face emoji and many more for reactions to the webinar. We highly encourage you to engage with them. We're having a lot of fun with them, aren't we, Mary, on this platform?
Oh my goodness, yes we are.
And last, the Twitter bird. If you click on it, that's for social media, and you can follow EDRM and Purpose Legal on LinkedIn. Back to you, Mary.
Thanks, Kaylee. And all opinions expressed here are our faculty's own, not those of their firm or clients, and no legal advice is being provided. So to know who will be speaking with you, we have such a stellar faculty today. Robert Singleton is the co-chair and director of the eDiscovery and data management for Squire Patton Boggs, and he's a member of the Squire Patton Boggs eDiscovery and data management team. As such, he concentrates his practice on electronic discovery and related issues. Ashley Bilbrey is an eDiscovery analytics and AI consultant with our trusted partner, Purpose Legal. She's got over 15 years experience in the eDiscovery industry, specializing in managed review and strategic consulting on TAR, technology-assisted review, and AI-driven solutions. Jeff Johnson, the Chief Innovation Officer for Purpose Legal, is also with us here, and he has been a significant change agent in legal services and technology. With over 20 years experience harnessing the synergy of people and technology, Jeff has been pivotal in redefining eDiscovery document review and litigation consulting services. And with that, Jeff, I would love for you to take the reins. Jeff?
Can you all hear me?
Now we can.
We can, yes. Well, we heard you for that quick moment, Jeff.
Okay, that's my. I'm hopeful that things are coming back.
Jeff, I think you should go out.
Is my connection getting any better?
Mary, go out and come back in.
Okay.
All right, Jeff is going to reestablish his connection.
All right, and let's begin. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Jeff is in, I think he said, is it northern Texas? And they're having massive storms and rain.
Robert, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of kick us off. Jeff was going to lead us into the depths of our AI discussion, but what we kind of wanted to do initially was going to give a broad overview of some of the common AI uses. Oh, Jeff's back. Jeff, are you with us?
I'm here. Does it feel like I'm here? Is it better question?
We can hear you, but it is going out a little bit. Maybe continue to talk and we'll see if the connection's better.
All right.
Nope. All right. Jeff's going to try again maybe, but so some of the, and Ashley, you can chime in here with your thoughts as well, but some of the common
Can
AI
you all
uses,
hear me at this point?
We can hear you, yes.
Hello?
Yeah,
oh, we can hear you
Jeff.
much better, Jeff.
Okay, I've taken myself off of video. We'll see if that helps us stay okay. Are you hearing complete sentences at this point?
Yes,
We are.
All right. Well, hey, I assume we're going to jump right in. Rob, how much have you already covered?
Very little. I was talking, we were going to talk common AI uses in eDiscovery, and then you came back, and so you can start from the beginning, Jeff.
All right. Well, oddly enough, as we joined, I was going to share a little bit this morning. It's raining in North Texas rather heavily, and I tried to get to a better internet connection, and as I drove flashing lights and I walked into a location that generally has better internet, and I felt like about the only additional thing that could go wrong this morning was a big boulder rolling out of the ceiling above my office and chasing me out into a barrage of blow darts and arrows. Because it shouldn't be this exciting to give a webinar in eDiscovery, but I am here now. Rob smiled a little bit, so it sounds like you're hearing me. Don't necessarily have to see me. I may try toggling my camera back on in a little bit. Really happy to spend some time talking to everybody today about AI in eDiscovery. We obviously see AI's use growing extensively in legal generally, whether that's legal services, contract management, breach response, and of course, eDiscovery. Our focus today is going to be on that eDiscovery component, and even more than that, focused on eDiscovery review, as you saw in the title. I do want to spend minutes setting the context. And as we talk about AI in eDiscovery, pulling back a little bit from just document review, we see eDiscovery AI's use in questions and answers, sort of a chat bot kind of a thing. And that can give us some help in case strategy, as well as just understanding our population a little bit and finding key data in there. I'll hit back on that in just a minute. But then, of course, there's document review as well. And those are all using really different applications of AI. And we're not in the weeds technical today or spend a lot of time on the different methodologies for implementing AI. We just want to cover a couple of broad groups. One of them you might have heard, retrieval augmented generation. And this is a lot of the chatbots that we might see, including those implemented in eDiscovery review tools, are using something called retrieval augmented generation, generally speaking. And what that means is the user is presenting a question. There's some technology in the platform that is gathering the documents that are most likely to be relevant to that question, and then submitting just that subset of the population to the LLM to get a response to the question. This has a lot of advantages from a speed and from a cost perspective. One of the risks inherent in a solution like this is the ability of the LLM to accurately answer your question depends entirely on that initial technology that identified the subset of documents actually identified the best subset of documents for the LLM to use. That's not what we're focusing on today. I will tell you that this is a good place for a disclaimer, just generally speaking. We have gone into this presentation wanting to present real world, what we're seeing. We can't possibly give you a presentation that covers what everybody is seeing or every technology. In generalities and in the context of what we've seen with our clients and in our projects and in our colleagues, which is candidly a pretty broad net. So what we're talking about today is pretty representative. I just don't want to give the impression that it includes every detail of every technology and every use case that is out there. This is a world that is changing very quickly. Moving on from retrieval augmented generation, let's go to the technology that underlies really our conversation for today. And that is the ability to use generative AI analysis and actually identify hot documents, responsive documents, privileged documents, just a lot of various ways of identifying the documents, purposes for identifying the documents, but using that doc by doc analysis. And the way that works is the user presents a question. Sometimes that question might be, is this document relevant or not? And then actual definitions of what responsiveness is. The technology is going to submit that question, the definitions, and one document at a time to the LLM and get a response back. That response may be, it'll generally be at least a responsive yes, no, but it will also be additional information, considerations, rationale, maybe a document summary to go along with that decision. We'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. With that context set, hopefully that made sense. We'll go into the rest of our webinar talking about document review specifically using this doc by doc analysis that incorporates generative AI. I believe you're ready to speak a little bit about some of the use cases we're seeing and how our clients are using it today.
So what we've been seeing a lot of is people using it to replace like first level review and doing like AI tools over like the full review population. And another like case that we've seen is where you're just using it for QC review and to enhance like linear review, to integrate those tools in like a subset of the review population, which would normally take over like what a traditional QC team would look at. And in my opinion, I think this is a good approach for companies and firms who are kind of hesitant to use AI tools either for cost reasons or just, the uncertainty or unknown or unprovenness so far of its accuracy. So that way you get the benefit of using AI and saving, a little bit of cost because it's not over your full population. And then you also have the ability to see how well it works. So those are some of the use cases. We haven't seen, I think, privilege review. More people are starting to move into that using AI tools. As you can see, it's touted as having more recall and better precision than your average your privilege term hits. Some people are still using it to kind of cull down the population and then have review teams, whether it's in-house or managed review teams, look at everything that was pulled in as potentially privileged by the tool. And then some firms are using it as replacing first level, but still going to that second level review and looking at things. And then I know we've had some early fact-finding cases, and I think we can speak to that. I think I'll pass that. Let's see. Or Rob. I think we've had recently worked.
Yeah, I would say that my firm most recently has been using the generative AI tools primarily to, I wouldn't say replace the first level review as much as augment the first level review. And the results we're seeing have been very encouraging. We've been able to get to the responsive documents quicker. We're seeing high recall rates in what the generative AI tool is coming back to us with, and allowing us to make quicker assessments of strengths or weaknesses in particular cases, and then work with our clients to develop strategies around what we're finding through the use of that generative AI tool. I would also say that it's helping us to kind of organize our thoughts, our strategies more efficiently by giving the litigation team or the investigating team an earlier strategic advantage by understanding kind of what those documents say without having to wait for the days or weeks or months in some cases for what the time frame that a traditional review would have potentially taken. And so I think that's kind of the early results that we're seeing, and like I said, they're very favorable, very encouraging, and allows our teams to get out in front of that strategic development.
Rob, I think, and by the way, I jumped out for a minute. I kind of think I know what we were talking about, and know what I expect you've covered. But I think right along the lines of what you were just saying, Rob, one of the things that I've just been really impressed with, even though you don't typically, it's not as natural to think about this doc by doc analysis as an overall strategy tool. Sometimes that other version of the AI might seem to lend itself more readily to a strategic Q&A type of thing. But what we've seen in some of the projects with your team, without obviously getting into any specifics, is strategically creating searches, almost like a DIY RAG, if you will, where we've strategically created searches and thrown a set of documents at the doc by doc analysis. And because you're getting more than just that responsiveness decision, because you're getting a summary of the document and rationale, we've seen instances where your teams and other teams that we're working with are actually learning things that they didn't know might be responsive or hot in a population from that output from the AI. So there's a really big strategic advantage to this type, the type of output you get from this tool as opposed to just a designation.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the benefits of AI is those, the synopsis that it gives you of those documents, because you're able to read 2 lines and kind of understand the gist of a document and then make decisions from that. One of the other things we did with some of our more recent projects is, rather than just a responsive, non-responsive sort of use of the generative AI, we targeted the AI, or we pointed the AI towards specific issues that we were seeing in the case. And so we developed separate inquiries or prompts for specific issues or specific categories that we were interested in, some coming from document requests, some coming from strategic ideas that we had, and had the AI go out and on a document by document basis identify documents that were relevant to those specific issues, and bring those back to us. And then, through the tool, you're able to see, here are 91 documents that are relevant to this issue, and here's a synopsis of each of those 91 documents. And you're absolutely right, Jeff. Our team was learning things through those synopses, and then we were able to go into the full document, find that location through the citation, and then further develop the strategy based on what we were learning from the synopsis. So absolutely a benefit to that initial case development.
Fantastic. That's a good segue into another topic that I wanted to hit on, and to some extent, I'm just sort of restating what Rob and I just mentioned, and that is, if you think about a traditional TAR process, where as you're starting the process of training a model to ultimately classify or prioritize your documents based on responsiveness, you're taking documents that the model wants you to look at, and you're reviewing those documents and you're giving a decision. Now, in the course of, in the case of maybe a traditional TAR 1.0, if you will, I don't necessarily love that term, but the workflow where we're training a model to break our documents up into responsive or not responsive, for example, you'll have somebody like me giving an associate a bunch of documents to look at, and we're just saying, here's the next batch of documents you can look at. Please mark them responsive or not. And then I might come back with some sort of model stability measurement or analysis to decide whether or not you need to keep doing that review. But you don't necessarily have much insight into why you're looking at those documents. Whereas in this workflow, the SME or the associate in the analogy I was just using would help us set up a definition of what responsive is. That's going to be plain English, talking about the matter, who some key parties are, what are the assertions from each side, who is the plaintiff, who is the plaintiff, who is the defendant. And that analysis, as I mentioned earlier, along with the question you're asking, is it relevant to this issue? Is it relevant generally? Is it a hot document? And then document by document, you're getting back that irrelevance decision, like you might with a trained TAR model. But in addition to that, and you and I have both alluded to this, you are getting back information-rich rationale, considerations, document summaries, and citations to the document, so that we know that the summary is grounded in the reality of the document that it analyzed. There's just a lot there that you don't get from a traditional TAR workflow, and candidly, that you generally don't get if you've enlisted a bunch of contract reviewers to review your documents. You're not getting that kind of insight in that as well.
And I would
say
add,
something, Rob?
Yeah, I would. I mean, one of the things you said is in that traditional TAR workflow, the old predictive coding workflow, right? You would batch out a set of documents to an associate, and sometimes it wasn't to an associate necessarily, right? You had to have someone who understood the case, understood the strategy, and so sometimes you were trying to get time with, senior associates of counsel, even partners, to train that model. And this was the more historic workflows, and that could be hard to do. Getting that much time from someone who's busy doing other things to train a model could be a challenge in that traditional TAR workflow. Whereas with the generative AI workflow, it's not necessary to have the partners sit there for hours and hours on end. You definitely want them to weigh in and provide their thoughts and their experience to prompt generation. But it's really more of, you could have an associate going through, the discovery request or the case or the complaint or the investigation or whatever, and developing prompts to find documents. And it could be handled at a not a lower level, but at a less senior level, to do that that initial prompt generation, and then the partner can chime in with, tweaks to that to make it more focused or more broad, depending on what we're trying to do. So that was another, difference. While they're both trying to find the relevant documents, being able to not use as much partner time in training a model would be, a benefit that the Gen AI tool allows.
Yeah, you're suggesting that partners don't appreciate being told just to review random documents until the F1 score high enough?
I've yet to run into a partner who's happy to be doing doc review. Yeah, I'm waiting for that day.
A little bit of a joke. So let's dive into it. That was just at a high level how the technology works. And Rob mentioned some other use cases where you're identifying issues that you want to review, you're identifying documents to review for those issues and submit them. I want to be conscious, and everybody should be, that there is a per document, at least in our world today. I suspect that this will change over time, but the world we operate in today, in most platforms, there's a per document, per submission charge for using this technology. Translated, that means if we're cost conscious, and generally we want to be at least efficient, we need to define workflows. So as we try to wrap workflows around this technology, it's going to vary depending on the use case. You won't always design your workflow to pinch every penny you possibly can. Sometimes it's well worth running some analysis multiple times for the strategic value that you can get quickly by bypassing some of those steps. But if we've got, Ashley mentioned earlier, possibly replacing first pass review, if that's our goal, for example, to replace first pass review on 1 million documents, you're not going to quickly jot out a few issues and submit all 1 million documents to that, learn what you can, and then resubmit all 1 million documents until you're happy with the results or you feel like the results are good. You have to approach it more deliberately than that, and with a workflow. And that's a lot of where we can add value in helping to define those workflows. Now, the workflows are very similar to what you might apply to a team of human reviewers. It's kind of the same thing. If you create a half-baked protocol and enlist a team of human reviewers to look at it using the protocol, we've implemented processes to QC, to ask questions, to iteratively make sure our protocol's right into that workflow, precisely because we would never have reviewers review 1 million documents and then go back and see if they understood protocol right. We would always come up with a way to make sure. I was on a review recently. It was a traditional TAR 2.0 workflow where counsel was very very deliberate about making sure that we were QCing each reviewer, working with them to QC each reviewer for the first 100 or 150 documents they reviewed, just to be sure that we were on the same page with the protocol. It's the same thing here. The set we're going to review in much the same way we would for human reviewers. Anything we can do to minimize the review population, whether that's email threading, date filtering, the search term filtering may still be appropriate. Anything we can do to reduce the population, we're going to do that in this context as well. And then we go through an iterative process to develop prompts. I'm actually going to go ahead.
One thing I would add to that, and one of the things that we did in one of our more recent AI projects was we identified things that were without a doubt going to be responsive, right? So we're used to cutting things out of the review that are non-responsive. And in this particular case, we knew that, emails to John from Mike were absolutely responsive to this particular case. So we went and identified all of those and pulled them out because we wanted to avoid, being charged for those documents when we knew they were going to be responsive anyways. And so just another way to think about, ways to cull this data, and, you got date culls and search terms, et cetera. But if you can pull things out that are definitely responsive, do that. And, you don't have to incur the Gen AI costs on things that are absolutely responsive.
Absolutely. And then just sort of building on a theme here that there's so much flexibility in this tool that is perhaps different than we've seen from other technology assisted review protocols. You could take that subset of documents that you know is going to be responsive, so you need to produce them. You could then run some hot filter terms against those to identify a set of documents that you still do want to throw at just for that, just to identify the hot documents and key issues and get that sort of analysis that we've talked about. So you're absolutely right. That's a great way to reduce the overall expenses. If you know a bunch of stuff is going to be responsive, you don't need to use the AI to make that determination. You just may want to turn around and use the AI on a subset of that in order to really identify the hot documents. But anyway, lots of flexibility there. I do want to hit on workflow and validation just a little bit more before we move on, because this is key to effectively using and certainly being able to demonstrate to any other party that you've effectively used this technology. And that, what we typically do is we arrive at a subset of the population, typically a very small subset, maybe 100, 200 documents. And we want to use any technology we can to make that subset as diverse as it can possibly be. So a lot of times we will run clustering on the entire population and then pull a stratified sample of a document or two from every cluster so that we've pulled documents from all the different topics that might be in the population. And then we use those as our subset that we test our prompts against. Ashley's going to talk a little bit more about prompting in a minute, but we come up with some prompts or the version of the protocol that we submit to the AI. We run it on those test documents. We look at the results as compared to results from an SME reviewer, and then we determine, okay, where did the AI get it wrong? How might we improve the instructions we're giving the AI in order to help the AI get it right more often? And once we feel good about that, then we might actually run sort of a statistical sample validation type exercise like we do in traditional TAR. And because of the way this technology works, we can run that before we've run the analysis on the entire population. So I pull a random sample, I run it, check the results without updating the prompts at this point. If it looks good enough, then I'm ready to forge ahead, run it on the population. And typically, we would generally recommend sort of a preliminary validation before we run it, as I just explained. And then rather than rely on that validation and only that validation, after you've run it on the entire population, pull another random sample separate from the first and revalidate at the end after you've got all of the AI generated decisions. We're not going to go into a lot of detail on this call, at least if we don't expect to, unless some questions lead us in that direction. But I just wanted to hit that workflow at a high level and just underline how critical it is that we have a workflow like this to help use the technology efficiently in a case where we're trying to do something like replace first pass review. And this workflow is very flexible depending on how we want to use it. We can always help develop the right validation and iteration steps for each and every review goal that we have. And they aren't all the same. With that, let's spend a little bit of time talking about that prompt iteration. That can sound onerous, especially when I use a word like of the title prompt engineer, and we don't typically enlist prompt engineers in this part of the process. Our technology providers have enlisted prompt engineers to help figure out how to best take our input, if you will, and combine that with their secret sauce in order to get the best out of the LLMs. So we don't even consider the folks that are building these prompts to be prompt engineers, and I'm stealing a little bit of Ashley's content here. Ashley, dive in and talk to us about prompts.
Yeah, so as Jeff alluded to, you don't have to be like an expert to draft prompts, and there's some best practices out there. some of the things on the slide, make sure it's clear and concise language, anything like you'd use for business writing, like caps to emphasize things, or, structuring formats to make sure you have people, noteworthy people grouped together. Those are, some of the types of things to kind of keep in mind as you draft prompts. Having experience kind of creating searches, I kind of make an analogy to the QC process with a review team or creating QC searches is, you create your QC searches based on the protocol that you're given, and then you see what's falling into your create prompts, and you'd run it on a sample like Jeff was suggesting before you go off on the full population. But then you'd get those results back, and then you would analyze the output from the AI and kind of refine your prompts based on what you're seeing. And there is some judgment on, in QC, you might have one document that maybe is or isn't responsive depending on what your QC search is, but you make a determination. Do you think there's a large category of that type of document in the population, or is it just a one-off? And that's kind of the same thing when you're doing prompt refinement or iterations, is you kind of make that judgment on, do you think that particular consideration or reasoning would be broad enough to incorporate into your prompts to capture more documents within the full population. So I really think this prompt iteration process is analogous to a QC modification and refinement process.
Thanks, Ashley. And I like to equate it to, you take we do sort of assume that we have a review protocol in the first place. I know on some smaller reviews, we often see that there's really not much of a protocol in place in writing. It's almost a word of mouth review where we've met about it. And this doesn't typically happen in a managed review context, but reviews where the firm might be doing it. We've encountered situations where to apply this technology, we have to create a review protocol from scratch and then move into prompting, and really converting a protocol that's already in writing to something that we can provide to the AI in this sort of analysis. More than anything else, it's like a different style guide that you're just, and Ashley hit on it, you want the language to be as concise and as clear and to the point as you can possibly make it. And that's a little bit different than we see in a lot of traditional review protocols. Fair? Is that fair, Ashley?
That's fair.
Okay. Don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm going to jump ahead to a topic that I think is really interesting and not, and evolving. And Rob, I'm going to ask you to sort of jump in and talk here about your experience with, let's say you've decided to use this technology. When, if ever, do you disclose it? How do you think that might evolve over time?
Yeah, so when we were preparing for this, and you mentioned disclosing, I really had two things immediately spring to mind. The first was disclosing to your client, right? You will be using client data in a generative AI tool that is going to send the document out to an LLM to be assessed and then give you the synopsis. And I think it's important to understand that needs to be disclosed to the client. The client needs to be fully aware of what's going to be happening with their documents and their data. So that would be kind of the first aspect of what do you disclose. I absolutely think if you think generative AI is the way to go for a particular case, that you disclose that to the client. They need to make an informed decision about what's going to be happening with their data. The other side of that is, disclosure to opposing counsel. And there's not a clear rule or case law or anything like that that's come out yet that requires or allows or prohibits or anything like that with regard to the disclosure of the use of generative AI in a particular case. I don't know that there will be anytime soon or what that rule or case law will look like. But when we talk about the disclosure of the use of generative AI to opposing counsel, it's really going to be done on a case-by-case basis. And there'll be a lot of factors that go into our decision. One is, what's the purpose of the use of the generative AI? Is it going to be making material decisions about relevance and what will be produced and not be produced? The sophistication of counsel on the other side, are they familiar with generative AI and how it works? Because what I don't want to do is I don't want to disclose something to opposing counsel and it create more questions than answers and more problems and discovery on discovery, and we get into battles that really don't need to happen. And so we definitely do it on a case-by-case basis, and we'll look at things like the number of documents that are going to be that generative AI is going to be applied to, and how that AI is going to be used in terms of identification of documents to ultimately be produced. If we are looking to replace attorney review, I think that would lean more towards disclosure than not disclosure. But again, as I've said, it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. When we talk about like to what detail, my general position is I'm not going to disclose, and I had the same view on predictive coding. It didn't tend to go well when we disclosed. It created a lot of questions that didn't need to be become an issue in litigation. So if I do ultimately decide to disclose, I'm probably going to give them enough detail for them to make an informed decision or an informed consent about the use of the generative AI. I don't know. I mean, Jeff, do you want me to go into talking about sharing prompts, or do you want to chime in with your thoughts on disclosure?
No, go ahead, Rob. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah. So when we talk about sharing prompts, if my team is generating the prompts themselves, I would argue that is work product and therefore would not disclose the actual prompt. That said, I see prompts sort of developing along the same lines as search terms. And with search terms, we absolutely discuss search terms with the other side. We get their input on potential search terms. It's an iterative process. We go back and forth and try to come to an agreement on what the search terms will be. I could see prompts going that way as well. If we have a reasonable opposing counsel and they are familiar with how prompts work and what the purpose of prompts are or is, then I would absolutely be willing to have discussions about, okay, what do you think a reasonable prompt would be for this particular issue, particular case, whatever, and then go back and forth with them to try to come to an agreement on what a prompt may be. And I could see parties and case law developing along that lines to where we don't necessarily share our prompts that we generate, because like I said, those would be work product, but we may have discussions about what a prompt should be and try to come to an agreement on a reasonable prompt to use to identify, or for the use in the generative AI tool to identify the documents that we're trying to capture.
Yeah, I laugh a little bit, Rob, when you talk about sharing prompts and negotiating prompts. And you hit on it earlier, the way these conversations is going, sophistication of whoever is on the other side of the table. And I think of all even just negotiating search terms wasn't always an easy or even a logical discussion in every case. And I just think that trying to do, I think you're right. I think that there is a world in the not terribly distant future where we are negotiating certain prompts back and forth. I'm just a little bit scared as to how those conversations will go. But I did want to circle back. I didn't want to interrupt your flow because my comments about disclosure were really just to second wholeheartedly what you said about disclosing to your client. I think it's worth noting that all of our firms, any large corporation, has a lot of internal regulation around use of this technology. And when we need to make our clients aware sooner than later when we think this is something that's going to be valuable, because more likely than not, they are going to have hoops to jump through in order to make, we need to make sure they know about it so that they can make it okay. So just wanted to second that. We do have
we got a couple of questions.
In fact, one of them is on the, I was just noticing that. They're both on prompts. I'll take the first one, Rob. If you want to take the second one, it's directed directly at you.
Yep.
Or advisable best practice to start with just copying and pasting the RFPs. I would say that it's not a problem to do that, especially if you've started with a workflow that is, that subset of documents for iterating prompts, 150 documents. It's not going to cost you much to throw just as crude a copy and paste as you want of the RFPs into the technology. Depending on the technology, you may have to sort of cut and paste and group that a little bit differently. But I don't see that as a problem for a starting point. I don't know how confident I am that you will not want to ultimately go in and make some changes through that iteration process. But, worst case, maybe it adds one extra iteration, and that's not that big a deal. So I don't have a problem with that as a starting point at all.
Jeff,
Rob, if you have thoughts on that and answer the other question.
Well, I've got a question for you on the question you just answered. I agree with you. I mean, as a starting point, it's probably not a bad idea. I hesitate because, some of the RFPs we see are extremely broad. Any and all documents relating, and then they, on whatever. And so it may be something where you, instead of cutting and pasting, you think about how you would object to the RFP. And what you would, what your actual response would be. You're objecting because it's overly broad, but you'll produce documents that relate to X, Y, Z that fall within that. You create a subset that is actually responsive and on point to the issues in the litigation, and maybe that's what you put in there as the prompt. But to what you were just saying, Jeff, aren't there limits in some of this technology to the number of prompts that you can put into the tool?
So absolutely. So some of the technology is going to just have a general relevance definition, and you can put a lot of different various types of relevance in there. If you're wanting to break out by issues and actually get a technology like this to weigh in on every issue, there are different limitations depending on the technology. I will tell you that the two that we use most commonly in the platform that is most common in our industry, you're going to be limited to 10 or 15 issues, depending you're using. Now, you can group issues into sort of broader issues. So if you've got an RFP that is 40 issues and you want to get RFP by RFP decisions, you're going to need to combine to get down to that limit. Is that what you were going for?
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. That was my thought as well. And that would be one of the challenges with just cutting and pasting RFPs is sometimes you'll have, many, many, many RFPs. And so you will have to consolidate them to make them work within the tool. So absolutely. So the second,
to be clear though, that is if you're wanting the tool to make RFP by RFP predictions. I can have a lot of issues in the definition of general relevance and get that relevant yes/no decision. To your point, if there are very general RFPs in there, you're going to get a lot of responsive documents.
Yeah, for sure. So to the second question, first, Vince, it's always good to see a friendly name out there, a name I recognize. So glad you're joining us. And yes, I do see a time when prompts would be treated a lot like search terms. And Jeff touched on this. Negotiating search terms can be a challenge, right? You can get into big fights over negotiating search terms, and I can see that being more challenging with these prompts because there's so much more that can go into them. It's not just this within 10 of this. It's whole paragraphs and whole sentences can make up these prompts, and so you're going to have a lot more back and forth discussions. But I definitely see a time where that could be something that we see in the future, where you're negotiating the search terms and you're giving the result. You're disclosing the results and say, hey, we're willing to do this, and these are the results that we got, and go on and produce those documents. So absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I want to jump ahead. We had planned to talk about other use cases. I certainly we'll hit this at a high level, and then Ashley has some nice show and tell that I want to make sure we save a few minutes to talk about. I think my main message here would be that, as I alluded to earlier in the conversation, these tools are incredibly flexible. So almost any use case you can imagine where it would be useful to have a team of associates review a bunch of documents and give you some responses back on those, we can probably dream up a workflow and apply this technology to it. And there are lots of different technologies with lots of different price points that can be applicable in different use cases, but deposition prep, looking at your own production for hot documents, throwing it at the other side's production, just any use case that you can imagine. I'd like to have a chance to think about how to use this technology against that. As a sort of a final show and tell, we did want to show a little bit of a corner case of document review that we don't talk about a lot necessarily, but if we want to do some analysis of image files, audio files, that sort of thing, I think it's worth talking about what some of these tools can do in that area. With that, I want to turn it back over to Ashley to talk about a few things.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. And these next few slides, they're all image analysis. So we have a couple of tools, and I'm sure there are more out there that are basically looking at the image. There's no OCR data, or it's, jumbly OCR data. So these slides are demonstrating like the AI tool's ability to make associations between what it's seeing on the image and concepts like commonly used. So this first slide right here, the document is kind of fuzzy, can't really make out the resolution of all of the words. And the prompt was asking it to gather documents that are related to the preparedness of computers or computer systems in Y2K was the exact prompt that was entered. And if you may not be able to see as well, but there's nothing on the actual image that says computers or Y2K. And on the right side of the screen, you can see the output from AI is relevant. And what's really interesting is the sum on the fact that it's Y2K, from the year 2000 in the picture, and it gives a really good summary of the image. So I think that's really cool. And then with the next slide, we ran 2 different prompts on this, again, just to see like how well the technology picks up on things and how it makes associations. So the prompt was basically saying anything regarding beauty pageants in Florida are responsive. And it took into consideration, may be hard to see, but there's an awning with, I can't really see it that well myself, but I know it says Everglades on it. And so the summary shows that it made a determination of relevant because somebody was wearing a crown, and it picked up that her dress kind of looks like a sash. And the cool thing is it actually says in the background, it includes a sign that says Everglades Restaurant. So again, it's making that connection of Everglades and Florida and making a determination. And then we, just to prove it to ourselves, we ran a second prompt on it, which is the next slide, where we were saying, beauty pageants and events in New York are responsive, but pageants held in Florida must not be responsive. And again, that's kind of a demonstration of using like caps and stuff in your pillar points, but that's a side note. So the same image, and this time it turns around with a not responsive decision based on the prompts, again, taking into the fact that Everglades was in the image, and it correctly made the association that Florida pageants are not responsive. So that's just, I think that's really interesting and cool. Is not, a business term, but it's a really cool feature of the tools. And then the last one is another really, I personally like it, managed review. What this is again, it's kind of a fuzzy resolution, but the actual image is, I think, like a Bible or some sort of birth certificate that is written in cursive, and it's also in Spanish. And you can see the output gives really good output from the prompt, where it's a pretty good synopsis of the cursive writing. It also picked up that there was a signature, and it showed like whose signature it is. And I could see that as a really a good tool in especially contract type cases where maybe it turns on who signed it when they signed it, and managed review, looking through contracts and trying to find signed versus unsigned documents is time consuming when you're using, DT searches and stuff. So I really thought this was a cool tool.
It is, Ashley. And I want to be sure we don't oversell anything. These tools are really effective at identifying where there is a signature. So to your point, if you're looking through a bunch of contract documents and you don't know which ones are draft, which ones are executed, the ability to just search for signatures is a big deal. And I've found it very impressive, A, at how good this technology is at cursive generally, and B, how good it is at actually deciphering the signed name in a lot of cases. Now, I will tell you, I don't know that I've tested it. I haven't tested it. I don't believe this technology could decipher my signature, because I know that it's evolved over time so that there might be one letter in my name that's actually represented in my signature. And a lot of people do that. So I don't want to, it's not magic, although it is magic, not to oversell too much. I want to just hit, like Ashley mentioned, with this Spanish document, getting an English text out of it. I mentioned audio. Audio isn't a very good media to try to do in a webinar like this, but we can do similar things with audio, where it's an audio. It can be bad audio, fuzzy, lots of static, or audio in a foreign language or a non-English language, and you can get English transcriptions of that audio and responsiveness decisions, issues decisions on that. That I do want to take we're almost out of time. I do want to answer this one question. Nothing we've talked about today is interacting directly with a ChatGPT, a Copilot, or a Harvey. So when Rob and I mentioned the limitations on very specifically 15 specific issue codes you could ask the AI for, that's because all of the technology, it won't surprise anybody about today, are used in a relativity ecosystem, whether it's relativity air or something else. Those are all interacting with a tool like OpenAI, and there's a context window that's the maximum amount of data you can send there, and they all have to operate within that. So that's where the limitation does come from, the underlying LLM, but that's not what we're interacting with here. We're interacting with the methods that our technology providers have implemented to manage within that context window. All right, so, and I would love to answer any additional questions. Maybe the folks at EDRM can help us gather those questions and get back to any that we haven't answered now. I think I see a few there. Any parting shot words from you, Rob, Ashley, before we say goodbye and appreciate everybody spending time with us today?
I mean, I guess my parting thought would be, the use of this technology. We touched on this earlier. Make sure you've disclosed it to your client. Your client's on board and understands kind of what's going to happen. But it should be done on a case-by-case basis. This is not going to be a cookie cutter fits everything, fits all cases and should be used every time. It's going to be very selective. I don't think this is replacing all document review at this point. I think it has a time and a place, and you just need to be aware of what that time and place is. So just evaluate it for your particular case and make the decision based on your particular case.
Could not have said it better. And we're out of time, Ashley. I appreciate everybody spending time with us today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Well, thanks, Jeff. And we will definitely share the questions with you that haven't been answered so that you can answer them individually. And we want to thank you. We want to thank our trusted partner, Purpose Legal, for making not only you, but Robert and Ashley available. Our thanks to the EDRM community for your very kind attention today. And if you enjoyed today's presentation, don't forget to click the link to schedule a meeting with the experts at Purpose Legal. We'll see you next time on the EDRM Global Webinar channel. Thank you.